Good afternoon. Welcome to the Cambridgeshire County Council's Children and Young People Committee. The county allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate? The meeting room has been arranged to comply with public health guidance on COVID safety. Committee members and officers will remove their face coverings at the start of the meeting and replace them at the end. This is to minimise the number of hand-to-face contacts. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked exit and assemble in the car park. Due to the extent of the agenda today, I'd like to advise members to keep comments and questions concise and expect to address the paper a single time if at all possible. Officers, I request any summary or introduction is as concise as possible also. Item number 1 is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Officer report any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Prentice and from Flavio Vittesi, who is the co-opted member for the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest today? Item 2 is the minutes of the meeting from the 19th of October and the minutes action log. We're being asked to approve these minutes as an accurate record. I will take these minutes as agreed unless anyone indicates otherwise now. Okay. I see no objections to the proposal to approve these minutes as an accurate record, so we'll take them as carried unanimously. An updated action log was included in the published papers for this meeting. Do members have any questions on the action log, or can we take it as noted? Okay, we'll take that as noted too. Item 3 is petitions and public question time. We've received no petitions or public questions this time, so we move on to item 4. Item 4 is action to address the continued recruitment of challenges in children's services. This report contains 2 appendices which are exempt from publication under paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, in that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. Information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Do any members wish to discuss the exempt appendices today? No? In that case, we can move to the report recommendations. We're being asked to note the details of the urgent decision to award a contract for the supply of staffing on an interim basis as set out. Is this right? In exempt appendix 2? Councillor Hay.
Sorry, I didn't realise we were moving straight to the recommendations. I thought we've just agreed that we didn't want to discuss the exempt paperwork. I do have a question on this report. I'm a bit concerned that this is yet another urgent decision that we're taking. Since the beginning of this administration in May, we seem to be taking more and more urgent decisions. This particular one, we must have known for some time that we had difficulty with recruiting of social workers. So I would like to know, if we did know for some time, why it wasn't brought to the October meeting.
I'm going to ask Lou to answer that one.
You're quite right. We have known for some time. You know, this has been a building picture as the report sets out. Sorry, it sounds a bit echoey. As the report sets out, the issue that happened was an opportunity. So we had an opportunity to source a volume of staff, and we had to grab that opportunity, and that's what happened. And unfortunately, that happened between committees. So that's why we had to make an urgent decision on that basis.
I understand that, but if we've known for some time that there was a problem, has this been brought before the committee before now?
So in previous reports to this committee, in my service director reports, I have talked about the challenges, and specifically in the last one, I talked about the challenges. I think what we're seeing is a very kind of fast moving situation, particularly in relation to agency staff. So as you'll know, we have permanent staff and agency staff, as this report talks about, but I think I also referenced in my last report that we're increasingly competing for agency staff on a kind of national basis, because people are able to essentially spend one night in a hotel wherever, do their visits, and then work from home elsewhere. So the market for agency staff has become incredibly tight. So we just haven't been able to fill those roles, and it's become, we've managed and we've managed and we've managed, and we got to the point where we were really we could be in a very difficult position when this offer became available, and that's why we took it.
Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, like everybody else around the table, I'm sure we can accept the reasons for it, and as Lou properly explained, and I think the point that Councillor Hay was making is very valid. But I couldn't help wondering when Lou said that it made this decision between meetings, and I couldn't help wondering, would we not have been at a better advantage for the committee to have been able to consider it had we not reduced the number of meetings that are actually being held of this and other committees? And I can't help thinking this is a reflection, because whilst we understand the reasons and it was important to take that decision, I still prefer that the committees made these decisions. And, as I say, just wanted to make that point. The frequency of meetings haven't been reduced, as affected, I believe, this occasion will affect others, I believe.
I would say it's not actually affected on this occasion. We did have a meeting in October and we are holding a meeting in November. So I'm not sure that had the schedule not changed.
Really talking about this current year, this has only recently happened, it didn't happen. I'm talking about the decision for the chief executive to take the delegated decision. Had there been a committee meeting, I'm sure it could have come to us.
So we had a committee meeting in October. The opportunity arose for this really at the very end of October and had to be grabbed within like a week or so. So, for this particular situation, I think it would have been difficult to have avoided, just because of the hugely competitive element that we're currently in. And my concern was that if we'd left it, we wouldn't have these staff that we could possibly bring to us. So from my point of view, that was the position.
Thank you. So we move to the report recommendations. We're being asked to note the details of the urgent decision to award a contract for the supply of staffing on an interim basis as set out in exempt appendix 2, and note and comment on the measures being taken to improve the permanent recruitment and retention of our staff, which we have done.
Apologise. I was expecting Lou to go on a little bit more to tell us what was happening. I do have an observation in the report that I would just like to bring up, if I may. I do apologise for that. It's just on the page 20.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry. If I may, that would have to be at your discretion because the item is now closed.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Page 20. Thank you very much. Page 27. 4.7 public health implications. I note that Fiona McMillan, our legal officer, has not cleared the council's cleared the implications that are arisen from statutory, legal, and risk implications. They're not been cleared by the monitoring officer. It says no. All the others say yes. Does that cause any problems? I ask.
That's an error. She had cleared it, to be honest. So I can confirm that Fiona McMillan had signed off the legal and risk implications. So that's an error in the paperwork.
Item 5. Thank you, Lou. Item 5 is the finance monitoring report for October. Martin Wade, Strategic Finance and Business Partner, will present this report.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the report to the position as at the end of October, as it states. So the overall bottom line forecast for core budgets within the remit of this committee has now reduced to a £420,000 overspend. This is despite a slightly worsening forecasts on the children and care placement budgets and home to school transport budgets, which are both primarily as a result of pressures on the current market. These overspends have been offset by underspends in other areas, most notably the overachievement of vacancy savings assumptions within children's. And as noted in Lou's previous paper, part of that overachievement is to be used to meet the cost of those additional locum staff. Although the position may flex in the coming months if levels of vacancies and turnover change, we will obviously update the report and the figures to reflect that as and when that happens. The only other area I just want to draw attention to is in respect to the dedicated schools grant, where we've worsened the in-year position forecast slightly from the original 11.2 million to 13.4 million. And that's a result of the increasing need within high needs and increasing number of education and healthcare plans, which has previously been reported to this committee. And I believe John actually covers some of that in his service director report later on in the agenda. So they're the main areas I just wanted to draw attention to. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Martin. I'll now open this report up to questions and debate. Councillor Slatter, please.
Thank you. 2.2.3. I just wanted to, it's not really a question, but just to support us holding our nerve on the outdoor education capability of the county. I'm sure it's really important we keep able to provide Grafton water, isn't it? I know you said Rutland water, but Grafton water. We know how much that means to our children, and certainly from their mental and physical health. And I know it's difficult to support, to keep a deficit going, but I'm sure we should hold our nerve on this. And if we can find ways of making it pay a little bit more, fine. But I'm hoping that other councillors feel the same way, that we should keep this really splendid facility, because it particularly helps those who other parts can't reach in the way of county services.
Thank you. No one else? So we move to the report recommendation. We've been asked to review and comment on this report, which we have done. Thank you, Martin. Item 6. Item 6 is the review of the draft revenue and capital business planning proposals for 2022 to 2027. Lou Williams, Director of Children's Services, and Jonathan Lewis, Director of Service Director for Education, will present this report, and Martin Wade will also be available to answer questions. Thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. I can see me. Apologies, I'm having problems with the microphone. So I don't think we want to go into detail on the report. Happy to take questions. I think it's fairly self-explanatory, and you've got lots of backing papers to support the paper itself. Thank you.
Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I noticed that St Neots has been removed from the capital funding. Are local members aware of this? Are local members happy with that?
Yes, I have met with the local members to discuss that. Obviously, it's a similar scenario to the other free schools where there is provision being delivered, and this is simply the accounting entries to balance up that external funding that's coming in.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will allude to this in item 10, and yes, I'm fully aware of the capital funding removal.
Councillor Hay, please.
Well, I just noticed that in October, we were told that Wisbech and Soham were also going to be removed, but there's no mention of that in here in this particular report, although Wisbech is dealt with further on, I believe.
So in the later report, we've covered all the free schools. So the details on the removal of those two were in the previous paper you considered in October.
Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to dive into some of these savings proposals very quickly, if I may. Firstly, the saving proposal around delivering savings in social and education transport. We're obviously spending a huge and increasing amount of money in this area. And so I understand the rationale for bringing forward some investment to possibly achieve some savings. I'd like to understand why the phasing of investment and savings has been chosen as it is, i.e. to achieve this over 3 years. Since we are spending since there's so much opportunity here, is there not a rationale for accelerating this more upfront investment and gaining those savings earlier rather than later?
The position around transport is we like to work around academic years. We want certainty for parents about the provision we can provide. Certainly there could be some opportunities for accelerating. We've got a range of areas as part of the business case to consider. The committee has seen several of those, the after school transport and safer walking routes previously. I think a phased approach over time is one that we can probably deliver sustainably and appropriately. But as the proposals develop and the investment comes through, we will look to accelerate those as soon as we can. Obviously, it's a very sensitive area. We want to handle that appropriately and make sure good decisions are made about the savings we're putting forward.
Councillor King, please.
To give back to Michael.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I've just found the other one I wanted to ask about. Sorry, it's quite hard navigating this many pages. I can't find the exact page number, but in the discussion of the dedicated schools grant, you said you considered, if I recall off the top of my head, a range of different options for narrowing that deficit. And I think you've presented one in this paper, which I welcome. But I wonder if you could circulate a short note, it really doesn't need to be long, to members, just outlining the other things that you considered and why you've chosen this particular approach. I think particularly given that it doesn't fully address the deficit, it would be really helpful to understand perhaps you had one of those 5 would have fully addressed the deficit, but was kind of unsustainable for other reasons, or just to kind of understand the decisions that are going on a bit better. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very happy to provide more information. Obviously, in my service director report, there is some more detail and depth behind the savings. Perhaps if we get to that stage, you could ask that question and we could perhaps explore in more detail at that stage the savings areas we put forward. One distinction I have to put forward, though, is that we are not going to repay the deficit with the savings put forward. We think that's an impact on children we're not willing to consider, but we are working with the Department for Education and others around making sure that we are sustainable in year, and that's our first priority with these funding saving areas.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you. Continuing on the savings theme from Councillor Atkins, I have a question for Lou on the children and care placement costs item and the special guardianship item. So it is clear from the papers that both of those items, the savings we are expected to make, are predicated on the continuing success of our family guardianship approach. And as we know, that is funded by government grants. So I just want to explore whether there is sustainability in that funding, and if or when that grant expires, we can continue to make use of that model to make sure that the savings are there and the outcomes are good for vulnerable families and children. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So family safeguarding the additional adult staff for the family safeguarding model are absolutely funded through a government grant at the moment. That is expected to last at least until the end of the 22-23 financial year and probably into 23-24. And I've worked with colleagues in finance to make sure that there's a sustainability plan to fund the continuation of the service beyond that point. The whole idea around family safeguarding is that you reduce demand and you do that in a sustainable way, which means that you will need fewer children in care placements, for example, and you will actually need some fewer staff as well, because overall levels of work in the service is reduced. So, as I say, I've worked with finance colleagues. We're confident that the sustainability plan that we've got will take us beyond the time that the grant runs to an end, but that should last at least until the end of 22-23 and probably to the end of 23-24.
Councillor Hay, please.
Thank you, Chair. Savings seems to be the theme here. I have a question about on page 128, it mentions 600,000 of savings. And part of that savings is by removing an historical investment item. So my first question is, I'd like to understand more what that historical investment item is. Then my second question relates to something on page 130, where it mentions a further saving of 174. And this is to reverse planned investment in flexible shared care, which is thought to benefit families who are struggling to manage the challenging behaviour of one or more, they're usually teenage children. You know, what are we putting in place to help these families if we're removing this?
So if I can take the second question first, we would essentially, we've wrapped that up into the placement budget. So it was put in as a separate investment line. It's not a model of practice that I would personally support, because I think actually what we need to do is to make sure that we're supporting families to look after their children and to keep their children at home. And we've protected investment in different forms, so particularly at the edge of care service, so early help services, our targeted youth support services or early youth support services, and also the SAFE team, which is referenced elsewhere. So the SAFE team is particularly working with young people who are in that category, if you like, of being particularly vulnerable to leaving home in unplanned circumstances. So it's a sort of combination of things, but that line in the budget and that investment, I would say, is no longer required. And I think that is also what's referred to as the historical savings. So your first part of the question, I think actually that's mentioned twice.
Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you, Chair. Continuing the theme of savings, I had a question about the savings proposal on the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. I think it's welcome that the government has reviewed this funding, and also that there is a note that there will be no impact on the services that we provide to this group of children and young people. So I think that's really important there. But I had a question about, like, how do you see this in the long term? Because maybe I missed this, but this is for next year, like, I mean, this year's planning, right? So, like, is there any kind of confidence that the government would continue funding this, so we don't have to use core budget in the years to come, or is it kind of like a more one-off arrangement? So if you can provide more context about the government, central government funding on this would be great. Thank you.
So I don't have a line to central government in terms of their budget planning, but they have been very, very clear that they are committed to more than funding, if you like, the cost of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, young people. And just to be clear, we treat them as children in care, and we treat them as leaving care, you know, young people leaving care, so they get exactly the same service as any child in our care. Up until now, government hasn't met the full costs even of placement costs. They're now meeting more than the cost of placement costs, but you know, the local authority also has to spend money on social workers, on reviewing officers, on all sorts of other things, and continue to do so. So it's really that's the basis on which that savings been able to be identified. It is paid on a per capita basis to young people, so it's we get an allowance for every single child or young person that we're supporting under that category. I think it would be politically very, very difficult for them to reduce that in future years. Obviously, if they did, we'd have to look at it when they did, but I think it's pretty safe.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to comment? Question? So we're moving to the vote. Co-opted members are not eligible to vote on this item. Sorry, Councillor Hoy.
Yeah, could I ask that, I know that at Strategy and Resources, Councillor Netzinger removed the word endorse, and then we voted en bloc for all of them. So I was going to ask, are you happy to do that? If not, could we please take them individually?
Chair, yes, you do have discretion to vary the recommendation.
So change it to comment on the budget and savings proposals. You happy with that, Councillor Hoy? Yeah. Thank you, Rashanda.
Thank you. It's just to remove the word endorse from both recommendations.
Fine.
Thank you.
So we're being asked to vote on A, noting the progress made to to date and the next steps required to develop the business plan for 2022-2027, to comment on and endorse the budget savings proposals that are within the remit of this committee. Sorry, I've just said endorse. I'll start B again. To comment on the budget and savings proposals that are within the remit of the committee as part of the consideration of the council's overall business plan. C, to comment on the proposed changes to the capital programme that are within the remit of the committee as part of the consideration of the council's overall business plan. And D, to note the update to fees and charges for 2022-2023. Would those in favour of the recommendations please raise their hands? Are there any abstentions? Anyone against? Would the Democratic Services Officer confirm the outcome of the vote?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Item 7. Item 7 is the establishment of a new primary school at Waterbeach, Newtown. Claire Buckingham, Strategic Education and Place Planning Manager, will introduce this. Will introduce this report remotely, and we will then hear from Councillor Anna Bradnam, who's asked to address the committee in her capacity as the local member for Waterbeach.
Chair, I think we're just having a few problems getting Claire, so if you just bear with us a moment.
Just waiting for technology to become our friend.
Chair, I'm very happy to try and present in Claire's absence if we want to move forward, because obviously the councillor's waiting to present her part, and I can probably get far enough through it with 4 questions anyway, at least.
Thank you, John. I think if we go ahead with that, and hopefully Claire can join us when technology allows.
Okay, I think the report hopefully is fairly self-explanatory. We've been running a free school presumption process for the new school at Waterbeach. This is where the local authority will make a recommendation for the potential sponsor for a new school. I think a detailed process has been undertaken, as you'll see from the report itself. And I'm pleased to report we did have a strong response from the sector to work with us to operate this new school. And essentially the paper covers that process. It talks about the 3 trusts that we went through to the final stage, where we had representative from the local member from this committee and also officers. And obviously the detail in the paper outlines our choice of sponsor, which is Anglia Learning. And it's our recommendation for the committee that we put that recommendation to the Regional Schools Commissioner, who has the final decision-making process as part of that report. So I hope it's self-explanatory. Happy to take questions after, obviously, the councillor has had an opportunity to comment.
Thank you, John. Councillor Bradnam, is she here?
At present, we haven't got Councillor Bradnam, I'm afraid, Chair.
Okay. I'll open the report to questions and we'll have Councillor Bradnam afterwards. Does that work? Yeah. Any comments or questions, please?
I think, Chair, obviously your call, but I think if you wanted to just adjourn perhaps briefly for a couple of moments, couple of minutes, and we'll try and get Councillor Bradnam.
Okay, so we'll take a brief adjournment while we wait and see if we can get Councillor Bradnam on the live screen. Thank you.
Chair, we haven't been able to reach Councillor Bradnam, so I think whether Claire might be able to brief us because on what the local members' views were, and we'll keep trying.
Claire, is that all right to brief us on local member views on this?
Yes, I think really, I mean, just to summarise that Councillor Bradnam was a member of the assessment panel, and she the panel decision recommendation was unanimous, and Councillor Bradnam was part of that unanimous decision. Not really sure what more I can add, really.
I think I can interpret that as the decision was unanimous. I was there on the day. We did have a full discussion and meet with all of the interested parties. Claire, sorry, you're breaking up slightly. I think we might have to.
I'll turn my camera off.
Is there anything you wish to add, Claire?
What in terms of what of Councillor Bradnam? Hello?
I think we're okay, Claire. If you're happy, it was a unanimous decision on the day. We'll take that forward. Thank you. So
well, I've got, sorry, I mean, I've got comments to make in terms of introducing the item, if that's what you were waiting for.
Thank you. John's done that already. I think we'll try not to push the technology any further than we have already. Thank you.
Right. Okay.
So, committee members, any discussion points, comments? Councillor Maguire.
I'm quite happy with the recommendation and the process. I was just curious, and Johnson probably answer it for us. Anglia Learning as a preferment. They've obviously got other primary schools in this area or in that area, part of the county somewhere. I don't know them personally, so I just.
Yeah, they Sawston Village College is where they came out of, but they have Marley, which is the new school in the Marshalls development. They also have Fenditton, I'm going to say Bottisham Primary as well. So they have a range of schools. So obviously that was part of the consideration, part of the panel, is their capacity there. What other schools do they have? And clearly that they demonstrated they have the expertise in primary school improvement, which is what we're looking for.
Thank you. I think we'll move to the vote on this item. Co-opted members are not eligible to vote on this item. We're being asked to endorse Anglian Learning Trust as the council's preferred sponsor for the first primary school to serve the Waterbeach Newtown development. Would those in favour please raise your hands now? Thank you. I think that's unanimous, Rashenda. Thank you. Lovely. Technology didn't beat us, just about. Item 8. Item 8 is a framework for the early years provision, and this report will be introduced remotely by Penny Price, Area Education Officer. Penny, thank you.
Hello there. I'm sure you're fully aware of our statutory duty to ensure sufficient childcare places, not only for those 2-, 3 and 4-year-olds who wish to access their free entitlement, but also for parents who wish to work or train. In 2020, we were informed of the closing of a setting in Trumpington at the primary school. The setting was essential to ensure sufficient childcare in the area, and so although we offered support, it was not possible to keep the setting open, and the council stepped in as what is known as provider of the last resort to ensure we could continue to meet our sufficiency duty and to enable those families to continue to access their childcare. Provider of last resort, although it does enable us to meet our sufficiency duty, is not ideal because it's extremely costly to the council. And in the past few months, there have been additional closures of earlier settings across the county. we have offered these setting support, and we continue to do so. But sometimes, particularly when there is an issue in relation to recruitment of staff, it's not always possible to provide the support required to enable that setting to stay open. In order to avoid being the provider of the last resort, we have looked at a few options. We want to continue to be able to respond quickly to any future closures of settings located in council properties, and we're therefore proposing that we set up a childcare framework. Tendering takes a considerable amount of time, whereas a childcare framework would enable us to call on providers in a much shorter period of time, and we could use this as an alternative to stepping in as provider of last resort, or when we needed to identify a new childcare provider because a lease or a license was up for renewal. We have carried out some soft market testing with the earliest providers, and we've had a really positive interest and responses across the county from different childcare providers, early years, full daycare, etc., and childminders. So we think the response has been very positive, and we're therefore looking for committee to endorse the development of a childcare framework for us to use going forward.
Thank you, Penny. I will now open this report up to questions from the committee. Councillor Daunton, please.
Yes, thank you. We do know, don't we, that part of the problem for childcare providers is the salary levels and the competition from an increasing type of employer where salaries are rising more quickly in order to retain staff. What do you think that we can do to match salaries? Other things that we can possibly do by way of retention? I think if we don't do something soon, this problem is going to grow and grow.
I think that's a very good question. I think we have limited options, although we can encourage providers to consider the terms and conditions for their staff. We really don't have any direct influence over that. So I think the actions that we can take in relation to staff pay and terms and conditions really are quite limited. I don't know if John wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, this is a really challenging area because it's a market. It's not set by national structures, paying conditions, unlike schools. It's a separate market. I think there's two things though that are relevant. The government has announced an extra 160 million into the early years sector this year, so we're hoping that will support pay issues in that sector. Increases up to 180 million the year after, another 180 million, which will be productive for the sector, but probably not solve their issues. The other thing I would say is that we need to see early years as a really great place to people to grow a profession. So we've invested huge amounts of resources in developing people, offering the opportunity to work through the relevant training and seek higher level qualifications in this area. So I think we need to sell it as a really great career for people to move on and develop as they go through.
Just come back on. Okay, I have as you probably know, I have an issue in my own division, and I think, as you rightly say, it is a matter of culture. It's a culture of appreciation for the importance of the job, and somehow if we could get across that appreciation and recognition of the importance of the role.
Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. One question of sort of clarification, if I may, and then another question. So I don't immediately understand, and I'm sure there's a very good reason, why there has been a positive response to this framework and the kind of soft work that you've carried out there when the existing providers seem to be struggling so much. So there may be some kind of financial arrangement there that I'm not, it may be some kind of different funding or something that I don't understand, but it's not immediately obvious to me why this should be treated so positively when so many people are pulling out of the market. My second question would be, if we think that this problem is going to grow and expand, do we think there's a risk that even this framework won't solve the problem, and that we need to be taking steps now to think about, if we have to do more in-house provision, how we appropriately organise, fund and structure that, and do that now rather than when we need it in a crisis?
In relation to your question about the soft market testing, I'm not sure why some providers feel so positive about responding to this, even though some providers are leaving the market. I can only assume that the response from the current providers are those who are not experiencing any challenges and feel they're in a positive position to respond quickly should there be an opportunity to provide or set up a new earlier setting. I know that the providers who are leaving the market are very much struggling, and even the support that we can provide can't help them out. So, but there obviously are very different circumstances, and some providers aren't experiencing the challenges that others are. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Sorry, so the second thing, and I think this is perhaps more important, I suppose. Second question is whether we need to kind of think about how we organise and fund and structure our in-house provision. I think particularly if I'm not immediately convinced that if some providers are exiting the market, that others may be expressing some interest in a framework, but are they actually going to come through when we need them? And I think we need to have our in-house stuff really ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible approach. Unfortunately, because we are only the provider of the last resort, so we are not able to just set up earliers and childcare settings without there being good reason and without there being nobody else available to run it. It's very difficult to foresee those circumstances when they're going to arise. But I mean, we have certainly been looking at the way forward and being prepared in the future, and we will continue to do that. I think it's a very sensible approach. John might want to add something here, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Penny. I think to be really clear on the challenge here, we as a result of the council's pay structures, we have to pay certain levels. So you'll be aware, living wage and issues such as that have been considered by the council. They're part of the costs that we have to pick up compared to the private, voluntary, independent sector that can be more flexible with their pay and conditions. One of the things that we are looking at and will consider is there a arm's length arrangement? Is there a way of working through other organisations to create a more flexible way of us to maintain the employment of those staff without necessarily cheaping people over into the council's terms and conditions? Because that's the big issue. To then put them back into the sector is really challenging. So we are working with our commercial team to see if there are ways that we could operate that to create that status quo, because we can't subsidise this provision. It would be unfair on the rest of the market if we were to pay more because it's run by the council and its employees. So it's a real dilemma, but we are looking at different models of delivery that might resolve some of this. But short term, we're incredibly worried about the market, hence why we need to put this framework in place to support us, to make sure continuity of provision is there.
Anybody else on this report? In that case, we'll move to a vote. Co-opting members are not eligible to vote on this item. Would those in favour of the recommendations please raise their hands? I think that's unanimous again, Rashenda, yeah. Item 9. Item 9 is the Service Director for Education's report, which is presented by Jonathan Lewis. Adrian Chapman, Service Director for Communities and Partnerships, is also available remotely if there are any questions around the household support grant element.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I did everything in my power to produce more paper than finance, but I failed, so apologies for that. But there is a huge amount of information that I'm sharing with you today as by means of an update. And I think whilst my agenda has been heavily influenced by COVID, I wanted to also bring out the other pieces of work that's been going on to develop educational outcomes across the Cambridgeshire area. So the report does step you through that. I'm not intending going in any detail of those areas in this brief summary, but to say we're at an important threshold now. We've got to plan for the future. You'll see areas such as the work on SEND, school improvement strategy, our planning for school places. And the feedback that we've had from schools show that there is work to do, but we have made progress, and I think good progress, particularly around how we work in the sector and support educational outcomes through the various parties that we do have. Other than that, I'm very happy to take questions. I'm sure there are lots of questions on the detail in the report, so I'll pause at that point for feedback.
Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you for that. I just got a question on item 5, capital and place planning, page 357. You talk about the prospects of 50,000 new homes across the county up to 2031, and the majority of them being new schools, and you touched on early years earlier. Are we planning in parallel with our partners for the future of the workforce of teachers? Kind of a bit concerned with TAs and support staff. Obviously, with all these new openings, we're going to have to be able to retain staff as well. So looking at the outside bodies, there's a joint consultative committee for teachers, which is currently not going ahead. So I just wonder if there's any plans for teachers going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been an ongoing issue for many years, although interesting you mentioned teaching assistants. That's probably where we've got the most acute challenges at the moment. Actually, the teaching staff work that DfE nationally has done and we've done in the local area has had good impact, and we are now fielding fields for jobs that we didn't do previously. I think it's really important to put in context the changes nationally. So we now have a teaching school hub that has a distinct responsibility around ensuring workforce. We continue to do a huge amount of work on behalf of the sector. So for those early career teachers, formerly NQTs, we continue to be the appropriate body for that work. Equally, our work we do around teacher recruitment. So we have a very detailed website where jobs are posted, and we offer people routes into teaching. So particularly a particular success area has been apprenticeships teachers. And supporting the transition of those with degrees from jobs to get the QTS qualification has been hugely successful for us. So the position is a lot more positive now. Yes, we're going to have to take account of the demographic growth that's there. I have to say the government have woken up, and there is a good supply coming through, which we didn't previously have. But teaching assistants is going to be more challenging, particularly around SEND and the higher level needs that we are experiencing in our mainstream schools. And that means training support, which you'll read later is part of the programme we have around SEND, is to skill up our workforce as well.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Chair. John, I have a question on the COVID response. So as we know, the papers have been issued before the latest concerns about the Omicron variant and the new measures announced nationally. So just as we already have been an enhanced response area, my question is around, has anything changed? Is there any additional guidance to the head teachers, and anything we can do from our side to support what needs to be done? Thank you.
Things move very quickly in government. So the announcement came on Sunday. We posted out our advice and guidance on Monday. I've sent clarification of frequently asked questions yesterday. So I'm very happy to share that as a note to the committee if you'd find that useful. So I know we'll be updating members on Friday, as I normally do, with some of those changes. As a result of the new variant, there are no changes currently in the practice that's happening in schools in Cambridgeshire. The key change nationally was the requirement for secondary face coverings, secondary age pupils and staff to wear face coverings in communal areas. We already had that in place. We put that in place as a local authority on the 5th of October, and the enhanced response area has added to that. The discrete change that we've got is if there is a reported case of the new variant, there will be a 10-day isolation of close contacts automatically, regardless of vaccination status or age. So we have advised our schools on that. And we've also got process set up where there is a case that there is an immediate incident management team, and bespoke advice will be given to that school based on their context. So I'm hoping we're ahead of the game. We're certainly there to try and deal with the concerns and from head teachers, and I'm very, very happy to share the advice that we've given out so far.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if perhaps now we can come back to the issue of the SEND and the transformation programme, as we mentioned briefly earlier. You've outlined in the report that the objective of this transformation is to ensure that that the right support is available, whilst making the service kind of sustainable on an ongoing basis. Am I correct in my reading of the finances that at the moment the kind of annual deficit is widening rather than narrowing because of the rise in EHCP plans? And so do you have a sense, I mean, number of potential questions out of that. Do you think we might get to a point where the deficit at least sort of the annual deficit stabilizes, and then the kind of overall deficit, that those are kind of two different targets? And my other question would be how, what are the kind of worst case scenarios we should be looking at? What, I think you've mentioned that at the moment 4% of pupils, slightly over the national average, have an EHCP. What's the kind of the worst case scenario that you're budgeting for on a financial perspective in terms of where that percentage might rise to?
We've been doing a huge amount of work in this area to model our future growth. We know the types of SEND that are growing. Autism and social emotional mental health needs are prominent in that group. Certainly in terms of modelling the budget, we've had to do a return to the Department for Education around our position as a local authority. The DfE have reviewed that and said our plans are right. They're not suggesting any other activity aside from what you see in this area. In fact, we've been asking them to tell us what else we should be doing, and they haven't been forthcoming with that. The growth continues. It's very hard to predict. At the moment, we have COVID challenges that we believe is creating more issues in these areas, particularly on that social, emotional, mental health angle. So predictions going forward are challenging, although we do expect that the number of EHCPs to rise. So we've gone through the 6,000 EHCPs this time, which is quite a monumental threshold for us, and it's likely to continue. In terms of the general deficit, we are predicting on current rates that we will reach around £60 million in 3 years' time. Interestingly, the DfE is collecting responses on deficits at the moment. We are 35th out of 151 local authorities for our percentage of deficit against the budget, and we are 10th in terms of the overall cash position. So, we are certainly involved with the government in terms of the position going forward, but actually that position has come down somewhat from where we were previously. And obviously one of the conversations we're having with the DfE is that there is a safety valve fund that they've released to 6 local authorities so far to write off their deficits. And we continue to make representation that Cambridgeshire should be afforded that approach, and the actions we've got in place will address to an extent the challenges we face. Obviously, the uncertainty is what changes going forward. So the plan is at a point in time. We already see a change in our demography since we've started this plan. So we will have to keep going and keep adjusting that plan as we move forward.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Do we have the 10th smallest or the 10th largest deficit?
I wish it was the 10th smallest. Unfortunately, it's the 10th largest, but it's not a complete data set for the government. So it's only in conversations we have that, but cash-wise, 10th largest, proportion of budget, 35th largest.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I fast forward you to page 369, which is the Trusted Partner Network? This is more probably curiosity that I'm not sure if John or maybe Adrian to answer it. I was curious as to why in the list of partners, East Cambs doesn't figure at all. I appreciate they may be covered by the county-wide one, which is Care Network, Barnardo's early help teams, but it doesn't get a mention. Fenelon only has one, there was Beach Food Bank. Comparing that with South Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire in particular, where there's lots of partners. I just wonder what the significance was. I'm sure East Cambs isn't, residents aren't losing out on this, but it's just peculiar that there's no partners. And I was just having been involved in it in the past, I was curious as to why. I don't know if somebody can answer it.
I'll look towards Wendy because I don't know the answer, or we're happy to take it away. I think Adrian was supposed to join us.
I was passing on to Adrian.
I'm digging through my memory, and I think this came up at the Cosmic Committee earlier in the month, and I think it was an omission rather than it not being there. It was it not? You don't recall?
Yeah, so Councillor Hoy asked me about Fendon, particularly with only one trusted provider, and have spoken to Adrian in terms of what they're going to do as a COSMIC committee in terms of developing more trusted providers in areas where there's a shortfall. So I suggest, given he's not here yet, that we ask him to send a note round to the committee about what the actions will be and to cover the South Cams issue as well, if that's okay, rather than me making it up.
For that, Chairman. Oh, Hazel's there.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, please.
Thanks. Yeah, mine was on that actually. I was going to say similar because it says in the report part of the success of the last project was down to the use of trusted partners, and then it omits East Cams and none in Fenland. So I'm not really sure that that could be held as a success. I understand obviously this has been running for a while, so I'm not sort of trying to make this as a political point. I just think that it hasn't really been very successful, and I don't think that they could necessarily claim it as such because they are our most deprived areas and they have got virtually no partners there. And I can immediately think of 15 off the top of my head that I'm sure would want to sign up to this and actually would take one email or one phone call to get them signed up. So I don't know where the blockage is, whether it's the district council that haven't fed them through, whether it's us haven't picked up the phone, I don't know, but I'd be very interested to hear kind of what's being done. And the second bit, which is still linked, is, and maybe I missed this in the report because it was a lot of pages, this committee, so I only got to read it once. Where and when will this be advertised, this fund? And is there a simple referral mechanism? I don't know if Jonathan or Wendy can ask that. So if someone messages me and says I'm in trouble, how do I say this is how you get help?
Yes, really simple referral form. What I'll do is send around to the whole of this committee, the communications out and the way that people can access that either directly or through somebody else like provides that. So I'll get the whole Adrian to send the pack around to this committee.
And just to add to that, we will on Friday be sending out the letter about the voucher scheme, and there is also information in the letter about the wider scheme and QR codes and others that areas you've suggested in the past you would like. So we'll sort that out.
Thank you. Was it Councillor Daunton next, please?
Yes, thank you. On page 359 to 360, you talk about small schools. And on 5.22, mention an initial briefing and engagement session with chairs of governors. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the engagement session? Is this engagement to push them towards joining a wider group, or is it engagement to help them to think about remaining as small schools? Are they being steered in a particular direction?
I don't think we're steering anyone in a direction. What we're interested in here is the viability and the quality of our small schools. You know, that is one of the outcomes that could be pursued, but equally there are other things, and you've seen the checklist in the appendix that sort of looks at where schools spend their money, the benefits of working together, and to you know, to further develop their viability through different ways of working. So I don't know if Andrew, if you want to comment on this, you've been heavily involved with this. Obviously, there's a number of church schools, and you know, I think we'll pursue all options to make sure that we can protect our small community schools. But Andrew, you've been much more involved.
Not much more to add. I mean, I think if you look down the financial risks that are listed as being managed, I think it's the small schools that are going to feel the effect of those risks greatest, because those are the schools with a relatively small, if not single, points of dependency financially. The high needs block, as far as I'm concerned, remains a extreme worry that I'm not convinced is fully mitigated by the approach that we're taking at the moment, with the greatest respect to those that have got a very difficult challenge trying to manage that. We're about to hit the same level as the entire annual budget for that area as a deficit. So as far as the small schools are concerned, working strongly in clusters is going to be the only way forward when you do the actual modelling of their sustainability.
I appreciate that, and I think obviously it's important that we think about the small schools in the round and the part that they play in local communities and community cohesion. And it's not, you know, there are lots of other things apart from what's immediately visible.
Yeah, agree. I think one benefit, and we'll obviously pick this up when we come back in January, is that sparsity factor in the national funding formula. It looks, and we've got some more data coming through, looks like it will trigger some additional resources, but I still think this piece of work is absolutely valuable to make sure our small schools are protected.
Yeah, I don't doubt the value of the work, but well, you hear my point and the concern, the local concern. Thanks.
Councillor Slatter, please.
It's just pursuing the household support theme and publicising it. I was very pleased to get the information from communications, and it does seem that there's much more scope for self-referral, which we can interpret as doing it alongside a counsellor. I think I have somebody coming in tomorrow morning, and I'm assuming that I can go through the online form with that woman and hopefully not make a mess of it. And I've also asked the social service person I could talk to if I'm unsure, because this is not something you want to mess up in the presence of a resident who's already under pressure. So it looks quite accessible. If there are problems, I was looking in vain for a particular officer's name that I could go to rather than the big bosses. Is there somebody who, if I have a minor problem on part of the online form, filling it in tomorrow, for example, or seeing what else can be got, is there somebody I can go to rather than the only phone number that the website's got? Yeah.
I would try that phone number or go for Adrian. Wendy suggested. I'm blaming Wendy for this one. Yeah,
and this is
fine.
Being recorded, this meeting, isn't it? So if Adrian sees that. Okay, I hesitate to do that if there was somebody else. Okay, thank you very much.
So I think it's okay to do that, because obviously if there is an issue, we don't think there will be because we have tested the form out, but actually we'll need to fix it very quickly. So better you go to the person up the top so they can fix the issue quickly if you do have a problem.
Understood, and thank you. And I also want to thank you for whoever it was I wrote to asking for a simple poster with a QR code, and it came back return of post pretty well. And that is so useful, just to be able to stick it on the board or hand it round. So thank you very much. I think, especially as it's money that the government set aside, we must make sure we use it all. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to comment on this? Councillor Taylor, please.
Always last. Hang on, take them out. Just want to commend John and his team on the school improvement strategy. Very good reading, and I found that it had very, very useful information there, which if my residents came to me with a problem, I understand the format and where I could flag them where to go. So I think that's very good reading. It's draft at the moment. After this committee, will it be ready for publication? And if so, can we also, I mean, where will it be going to? And also, can we send it to the wider members as well?
Yeah, we've had some feedback so far. Obviously, I'm keen to get feedback from you. So if there's any suggestions or comments, please let me know after the meeting. We are intending sending this out to schools or education partners, including those other organisations such as the diocese, the RSC, and others in January. I feel heads have enough on their plate at the moment, and I probably need to leave it to that point. And I will make sure a copy goes around to all members so they can see the draft and comment on it as well, because I'm really keen to get as many views as we can, with the view that we'll finalise this for the start of the summer term, so just after Easter.
Okay, assuming no one else wants to talk to that, we will make an action point that we talk to Adrian and get those communities that aren't represented on this, try and make that work more efficiently from our end, if that makes sense. So if that can be added, please. So the report recommendations, we're asked to note the report, comment on the elements of the report, and request any further information on the areas outlined. To note the agreement from Communities, Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee on the wider support scheme for the Household Support Grant, and to note that the Director of Education and Head of Procurement will be awarding a contract for the Christmas voucher scheme using the RM6255 for the Household Support Grant, which we have done. Thank you. Item 10. Item 10 is free school proposals and Wisbech Secondary School. Jonathan Lewis, the Service Director for Education, will stay with us to introduce this report, and I'll then ask Councillor Hoy to introduce her amendment to the report recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report evolves out of the previous meeting where we had some significant debate around the position with the Wisbech Free School. And what I seek to provide here is a response to those queries that were outstanding from the last meeting. And we've also sought to provide clarity around the other free school programmes that are running in Cambridgeshire and the equal treatment of those through our financial processes in the council. I think there's a key recommendation in the report that we ensure that the Strategy and Resources Committee commit to continue to fund our statutory duty with school places. And as a result of these changes, we'd like to take a recommendation to them that is part of the strategic planning of the council, that we would seek to reinstate funding to meet that pupil requirements, if in the case that the free schools that are covered in the paper are not delivered by the Department for Education. So I think I'm very happy to take questions on the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we move to the proposed amendment. So Councillor Hoy, would you like to introduce your proposed amendment to the report recommendations? You have up to 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you. I will try not to take that actually, because you'll be pleased to know I think I'm going to be much briefer than I was last time. So you'll all be happy about that. Really wanted to make the point that I was really glad of this report because I think it was a really useful background, because obviously there's a lot of new members on this committee on all sides that probably didn't know the history, and I think it was really interesting the point made about 14 forms of entry children need places in Wisbech, and the only reason that we aren't currently panicking is because a number of children go out of county to other schools. So if they were to overnight decide to come back to Wisbech, we would be really in a big problem. Now, obviously, I think that's unlikely that everyone would return overnight, but at the same time, the better TCA gets as a local school, the more likely it is that children are going to return. That said, the decision to remove the school from the capital programme has been made. I don't think there's any point kind of rehashing that decision. It's clearly not going to be overturned. There's kind of no point, I suppose, flogging a dead horse. I do believe that the church members should have been able to vote actually on that decision when it was made, because it was an education item. I understand the constitution has since been changed, but at the time it hadn't been. I also feel that the decision perhaps for us to build shouldn't have been made, and had perhaps it been a different committee, we would have made the decision perhaps to carry on and build it and taken the £6 million risk, because that was significantly less than we would have been paying. And I also feel that the decision to remove it from the programme was a political decision, save money in the budget. And as I said at S&R, I understand that and I get that, but people should have owned that perhaps a little bit more and shouldn't have just left officers in the firing line. But as I've said, it's happened now. There's no point, we could talk for hours, and I'm sure nobody wants to talk for hours about the whys and wherefores and how we got to this. What matters to me now, and what matters to people in Wisbech, is that the school is built. So I've tried to keep my 2 recommendations quite simple. I hope that it can gain support for everyone, because recommendation B is to say that we'll commit to building a new school to meet basic need rather than using mobile classrooms if the DFE failed to deliver. That's kind of what everyone's been saying all along anyway. They've been saying that we will build the school if DFE fail and there's basic need. Obviously, I made sure I included the part about basic need because I understand we can't just build a school if there's no children. And point C was very similar to what officers are also saying, that we aren't really comfortable with having the DFE build a new school on the existing TCA site because many reasons. So if the incinerator that people are saying is going to be built in the town, obviously we're hoping it won't, but if it was to go ahead, you've just then put more children at that school that will have to breathe in the fumes. It's obviously going to cause massive traffic issues because, like I said last time, children coming from the west to the east, there aren't really any safe walking and cycling routes. And it'd also lead to a massive loss of facilities at the school. Now, I know writing a letter might not do a great deal. They might not listen to us anyway, but at least we've given our view. So I hope now we can kind of all agree to this and kind of put this to bed, because like I say, I understand it has although I'm sad it's happened, it has happened, and there's no point kind of going on and on and on about it forever. So hopefully this can kind of put it to bed now.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for your amendment, please?
I actually didn't organise that, so I hope someone will second it.
Thank you, Councillor Hay.
Can I just say something on that at the same time?
So we speak now to the, as seconder, you can speak now or you can reserve your right until later.
No, I'll speak now.
Okay.
I mean, so one of the reasons I've seconded this, I truly do believe there is a need for a secondary school in Wisbech. And I am concerned that originally, I suppose it was supposed to be built this year, wasn't it? 2020, yeah. Now that it's gone back to the Department for Education, they're now looking at alternative sites. I'm not convinced that they will build in the right place for a start off. But also, we were led to believe at the meeting on the 19th of October that at this present time there was no need. And yet in this report at 4.5, it says Thomas Clarkson had to over-admit in the last 3 years at the request of the authority. It also says there's a waiting list. And it also mentions that 120 children go out of Cambridgeshire because they can't get places, I presume. In the graphs, table 2, it says 2021 year 7 pupils 268, 21-22 year 7 pupils 269, and yet we're being told from 21-22 onwards, pupil year 6 is forecast at well over 400, 100 more than we currently have. And for that reason, I will be supporting this because I truly want to see a school built there.
Thank you. Procedure is that we now open the amendment only to debate by committee. Would anyone like to speak on the amendment? Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, I just want to thank Councillor Hoy and other local members for continuous focus and passion to get a new school for Wisbech, which the sentiment we fully share. What I would like to propose is that we vote separately on the 2 recommendations in the amendment. And I just want to speak very briefly on the first proposal. So the paper under item 10 in the documents, in the document pack, is, I think, as John noted, covers is wider than just the Wisbech school situation. It covers the schools in St. Neots and in Soham. And as such, by voting on the amendment, the proposed recommendation 1 under amendment, we have a reservation that it would create a precedent and would in the future stop us using mobile classrooms for other schools, which is clearly, a quick and efficient way to create additional school places when we need them. So this is not to say that mobile classrooms is the right solution for Wisbech, or we kind of are fundamentally opposed to building a new school. But that is to say that we are not currently prepared to create the precedent by supporting that particular proposal. We would be very happy to support the second recommendation. Thank you.
Canon Reid, please.
Well, I apologise if it may be the same point, but it did seem to me, I think it's a very sensible amendment that's been recommended in both cases. But this is reading as a recommendation to state policy based on the principle of a particular case, which I think would be a good idea. But it is, to second that, to just bring to the attention, this is a policy position.
Councillor Atkins, please.
Chair, would you permit me to request some points of clarification from the author of the underlying report, because that will help me then understand the amendment in more detail?
Absolutely.
Thank you. There are 2 points I wanted to clarify. Firstly, in terms of the over-admission, waiting lists, etc., Could you clarify for me, is that, are those waiting lists and over admissions, is that on the basis of, I think, 8 forms of entry at Thomas Clarkson Academy, or is that on the basis of 11 forms of entry, which is its maximum theoretical capacity?
That's based on the current published admission number, which is below the capacity. So it's 8 form compared to 11 form.
Okay, thanks. So just to be clear, when we say there are waiting lists and there's over admission, we mean we haven't chosen for whatever reason at this time to increase the published pupil admission number, but we could do so if that pressure was sustained up to, I guess, what, 30% more than we've got at the moment.
That is the case. Obviously, what we want to do is manage the numbers in the area, the catchment area. So the conversations we're having with Thomas Clarkson Academy and Brook Western, the Academy Trust, is that, you know, the flexibility will be around in catchment children to make sure we can deliver those spaces for them. And you know, we've had regular dialogue with them on this particular issue.
Thank you. The second thing I want to clarify, and apologies, this is from my own inexperience with this committee. What process, and this would apply, I think, for Wisbech or any of the other areas where there's a free school process underway, if the Department for Education decides not to proceed, what is the process in terms of what you would bring to committee, at what point, what would be the decision-making process there from there on?
So again, a bit of history here that, sorry, is not in the paper. We did start a free school presumption process for this school. That was paused at the point of this bid coming through. We would restart that process. Obviously, there's a conversation to be had around what needs to be delivered. I don't think an extension is a straightforward option here, actually. So we would be looking at the new school option, of course, but obviously that would be in light of the numbers coming through and the developments with it. But essentially it would come back, and the process you saw around Waterbeach would be replicated here for the secondary school.
Sorry, can you just clarify for me? You say, so if the current DFE approach were to send, you said there would be a decision made at that point as to whether to restart the free school presumption. Does that mean you would come back, or officers would come back to this committee and say, we are proposing to restart the free school presumption, or we are proposing to expand or mobile classrooms or whatever?
Obviously, I'd be very happy to update you. We already have the decision from the committee about a free school presumption process that's previously been made, but clearly we'd want to update you on where we were. So I would seek to bring that back at the appropriate time to the committee. Yeah, to do that, of course we would.
Thank you. On the basis of that, if I can speak very quickly to the amendment, I think I'm happy to support recommendation 2. I think recommendation 1, I fully appreciate the what's behind it and why it's been proposed, but it seems to me like we will have a very good opportunity to have that discussion at the appropriate time when the DFE has decided to pull out. I think that will be, and we'll have the most up-to-date demography, etc. So I think to kind of tie our hands and make a policy decision now doesn't seem to me to be entirely sensible. But if I'm incorrect in that, I would like to know. Thank you.
Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be cynical, because the cynical part of me would say that this is exactly what I predicted and you don't want to build the school and this is why you're not supporting it. But for the benefit of the doubt and to try and not think like that, and that we all want the school being built, are we not then able to amend recommendation B that we can all support, which is to make it say what Jonathan has said, that if the DFE does not build the school, we will resume the free school presumption process, because that does get the new school. And Jonathan has just said that, and that is effectively what I'm saying, that if the DFE don't build, what my concern is, I have to be honest, is that the DFE pull out and we just say, oh, well, we'll just put a couple of mobile classrooms for the next year or 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, kick the can down the road. That's my concern, and that's what I'm trying to address. And so if it was amended to be the same as what Jonathan said, that's pretty much actually what I want. So it's not a big problem for me to change that.
Jonathan?
Yeah, just one consideration we might need to have there. We need to make sure a new school is viable. So obviously size is one thing. You know, we have a established presumption through this committee. I think that 6 form entry was our smallest, or 4 form entry. So we would want to, if we were setting up a 2 form entry secondary school, it wouldn't happen. We couldn't run it and sustain it. So you know, I think it would be very much vested in the growth in Wisbech. Clearly, there is enough development in there to support long term a school, and we would just need to be mindful of the risk we would run that we may create an unviable school as a result of that decision. So whilst that would be my view that we take it forward, we would need to be careful with that because we don't want anything to fail equally in Wisbech because it's financially not sustainable.
Well, I would say maybe that's the answer then. So commit to something around like if there's a full form school. I'm just trying to think. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to think of a wording that makes you happy, makes me happy, but makes everyone can sign up to. That's what I do try. I want consensus if possible because we want the school built, don't we? So
I think the comment that we would seek to develop a school if numbers are sustainable to provide that would be the way forward. It would give you the ability. I'm sure you'll understand we wouldn't want to build a school that wasn't viable, but if the numbers reach that threshold, and the thresholds vary, to be fair, they are coming down nationally as a result of some of the policy changes that government are making. So my view would be that we would seek to restart that position if demographic numbers dictated otherwise. A committee debate on the future with speech places would be the appropriate thing, and I think revisiting the review would probably be an appropriate thing to do at that point.
Councillor King, please.
Thank you. So John, I just want to get clarity, and apologies if as a relatively new member it just going over some things again. If we do accept the new form of words proposed by Councillor Hoy, i.e. if the DOF pulls out, we resume the free school presumption process, would that process include what you've just alluded to, what you've just described, i.e. the review of the viability of the school and the projected numbers at the time when we resume that process?
I think what we'd probably seek to do is bring those figures alongside the recommencement of the free school presumption process. So members here could consider, that appropriate step forward, because obviously if it is low, we need one route. If it's high, but I do have to say it will be very difficult to expand Thomas Clarkson Academy because of the PFI scheme. So, we need to probably look properly at all the options at that point and consider what is the best in terms of educational outcomes and the financial implications of that as well.
Can I just clarify the wording of the amendment? Marvellous. Rashenda, I look to you.
Chair, just to clarify, because obviously there was a change to the constitution at the last meeting of full council, which did require that amendments to motions should be submitted in advance, which obviously is what Councillor Hoy has done. To make any changes to that, it does say no further amendment may be moved at the meeting except where the chair may permit at their absolute discretion in exceptional circumstances and to ensure the efficient and proper discharge of council business, a further amendment or amendments to be moved. So that would have to be at your absolute discretion, and you considering this is exceptional to make that change.
I think in terms of exception of cross-party collaboration on this one, I think it would be worth doing. Yeah.
Perhaps I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think off the hoof how the word would be. Perhaps B would now be if the DFE failed to deliver Wisbech free school, the county council's free school presumption route will continue, and then perhaps something about, do we need to add anything else to that, or is that, I'm sorry, I don't know what else to add.
Rashenda?
Chair, I think if you are wanting to make that amendment, could I suggest perhaps a brief adjournment so that you could discuss that with Councillor Hoy?
Yeah, is that all right? So we will take a 10-minute adjournment. Thank you. Thank you for that. So using exceptional powers, we are going to amend this amendment slightly. Councillor Hoy, are you okay to put forward your amendment, please?
Yeah, thank you. So obviously A and C would remain as they are on the paper, but B would change to, if the DfE withdraw from the Wisbech free school process, the committee will seek to recommence the free school presumption process if there is sufficient demand for a new school. And then open brackets, assuming full form entry is the minimum viable number, close brackets.
Okay, so if we vote on those two amendments first, sorry, Rashenda.
Sorry, can we just confirm your seconder again, being as it's been changed?
I didn't quite hear.
Just confirming seconder again, if you're still happy to second. Thank you, Councillor Hoy.
So if we vote on the two parts of the amendment first, so the first part is what Councillor Hoy just read. Can we have votes in favour, please? Thank you. Anyone abstaining? Against? Okay. And the second part, voting on part B, which is to write to the DfE to say a free school on the existing Thomas Clarkson Academy site is an unsuitable location. Those in favour, please raise their hands. Thank you. Is that unanimous, Rashenda? Lovely. So we now open the report and the substantive recommendation to debate. Are there any further comments or questions on this report? Councillor Hoy, please.
Just a very brief one to say thank you very much to everyone. Very grateful.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to talk on the recommendation A. So I just wanted to say for the committee to be mindful with the free school proposal, although it has a heading Wisbech Secondary School, and the recommendation is to recommend to Statutory Resources Committee that a risk is identified in the corporate risk register around the non-delivery of free schools, and to agree the free school programs if they were not to proceed. The council has and if the council has identified basic needs for the places there of the school. So basically what I'm trying to say is the report sets out two other free schools, Soham and St Neots, which has also been part of the free school proposals for many years, probably since I first joined 2016. All three areas are very similar in circumstances, and they have been treated the same with the capital funding being removed. Whilst the free school proposal is still on the table from the Department of Education, I feel the recommendation today on recommendation A is the correct one to take.
Councillor Maguire, please.
Apologies to Councillor Taylor. I'm not sure I fully follow the argument. What I fully understood it, and it's a bit of a complicated issue, but no doubt you'll explain it. But when we were talking earlier on item 6, you made reference to the fact you wanted to raise something in item 10, which is presumably this.
Yeah.
But what I was trying to see was, I know the question asked during item 6 was, were local members in favour of removing from the capital programme both the St Neots, well, speaking St Neots and Wisbech in particular, but and I'm still not sure. And what you said was you were aware. You didn't actually say you were actually in favour. And I just wondered if that's what you're getting at. I'd like to understand it a little bit better, if that's possible, Chairman, because I was slightly confused. Apologies.
Yeah, no, basically what I was saying is I agree with the capital funding to be removed because we're under a free school proposal. I do not understand why we have capital funding when we've got a free school proposal on the cards, but we have the safeguarding measure on recommendation A. Sorry, that's what I just called out earlier. So I was just quoting the recommendation A. So I'm happy that we've got this safeguard that will go to Strategy and Resources Committee. to say if the free school isn't going to be delivered, that, yeah, so I'm happy that the funding has gone, but the free school proposal is still there.
Sorry, Chairman, I we shouldn't be talking through. That would be like the fallback proposal, which is what we've already agreed.
Yeah. So I'm just talking on recommendation A. So, and to understand that it's not just about Wisbech, there are other free school proposals on the card, and we've all been treated the same. And capital funding has been removed for all of the free school proposals.
Certainly, that's what the recommendation says. It says through the DfE Central Free School Programme. So yes, my understanding would be it would cover the 3 schools under the current free school programme. Yeah. Canon Reid, please.
Thank you. It relates to the fact that so much of this seems to be predicated on good quality relationships between local and central government. And I know we've visited this before. We have a new RSC starting on the 1st of March. Is it possible for the committee to be proactive in inviting Jonathan Duff to come and talk to us out of meeting or in meeting about these issues? Because what we are underpinning this is, I feel, a question of trust as to what the DfE decision-making process alongside the local government decision-making process in the context of the establishment of new schools.
Yeah, I can't see the problem in inviting and having that as a discussion. Can we have that as an action, please, Rashenda? Thank you. Councillor Slatter, please.
Yes, just for me to confirm, I'm groping a bit like Councillor Maguire. When I voted very happily for Councillor Hoy's, I thought to myself, that it could be another report about a new school in St Neots or Soham or wherever. We'd have the detail that's local and the conclusion and recommendation that are generally applicable. So you could take out Wisbech and put bracket Soham, and we'd still be following the same thing. And if that's equitable and it responds to local needs, then that's fine by me. So the fact that what we're voting on had the word Wisbech in it doesn't mean that in the future it couldn't be the same wording, but with a different locality. Is that right?
I think just hopefully to clarify, the situation at Soham and St Neots is different. The intention there was to expand the schools. That was our planning behind it. The Wisbech was very much about a new school. So I think if you're voting on the original recommendation, that covers the reinstatement of the funding. The difference is that we have a free school presumption only in the Wisbech scenario, and that's why that additional recommendation covers those areas. So I think we're covered with the scenarios, and I think it goes back to the original planning intentions, which was 2 expansions and a new school, pending the numbers being available.
And if you, I mean, for example, Trumpington went through a very different process, but that was from scratch. And if you got another new area like Trumpington was, it would still apply, and it would be fair all round, which is what I'm keen to. So thank you, Bouncing Pen.
Thank you. If there's nobody else, I think we'll move to vote on this item. I think we can take all 3 at the same time. Is that right, Rashenda? So we are being asked to vote on if the Department for Education withdraw from the Wisbech free school process, the committee will seek to recommence the free school presumption process if there is sufficient demand for a new school, assuming a 4th form entry is the minimum viable number for that. B is to commit to a new school to meet basic need. Oh, no, ignore me. B, that is B. That is B. A is recommend to the Strategy and Resources Committee that the risk is identified in the corporate risk register around the non-delivery of free schools, and to agree to fund required school places if free school projects approved through the DfE's Central Free School Programme were not to proceed, and the Council has identified a basic need for places in the area the school would serve. And C is to write to the Department for Education so that a free school on the existing Thomas Clarkson Academy site is an unsuitable location. Would those in favour of these recommendations raise their hands now? Thank you. Is that unanimous, Rashenda? Thank you. Item 11. Item 11 is the school revenue funding arrangements 2022 to 2023. Jonathan Lewis will stay with us to introduce this report and is joined by Martin Wade, Strategic Finance and Business Partner. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. This is just really to give a bit of an update on where we are with the schools budget setting for 22-23. We believe, we're not sure there's a date being set, but we are planning to do a more detailed briefing for all members on schools funding, because we recognise the complexity of how schools funding operates, and recognise also there's quite a few new members who won't have been through this process before. So this paper is really just to give a kind of an update on where we are at the moment based on what the Department for Education have already published, and the discussions we've had with Schools Forum and the consultation with the schools. So every year the Department for Education will publish some indicative figures in the summer based on what they're proposing to do for the national funding formula for schools the following year. Those figures are, as I say, are indicative based on the prior year pupil numbers. So schools funding is based on October census data, which obviously for this year is still being collected. So any numbers in this report are purely illustrative at this time, and will be updated on receipt of the revised data sets from the Department for Education, which is normally the kind of the week before Christmas we receive that information. So there's been a number of proposed changes to the national funding formula, and John's already mentioned one of them earlier around sparsity funding. This is particularly relevant to our small rural schools, and changes at a national level have more than doubled the amount of funding that's coming through this route now, and equally has increased the number of schools which are eligible for this funding by changing the distance criteria which applies to these schools. So I think when we've looked at how it applies to our school, there's about 13 additional small rural primary schools which will qualify for this additional funding. So going back to the earlier point around the pressure on small schools are under, this should benefit a number of those schools. Most of the other changes at a national level will have little or no impact in terms of our individual schools when we run it through the formula. Probably the biggest other changes are around some of the data sets which are being used. Obviously, because of the pandemic, some of the censuses last year weren't undertaken, and things such as the prior attainment data, mobility data will be using slightly different data sets to what have been applied in previous years, but at individual school level, that the impact of that should be minimal. In terms of the overall funding, we've seen uplifts in funding of around £11.8 million within Cambridgeshire, which is 2.9% on our schools block funding, and that effectively is the money that will be allocated out to primary and secondary schools through the funding formula. Elsewhere, we've seen an uplift of 6.5% for the high needs block, and again, as referenced earlier, that is obviously an area which is under particular pressure. The minimum floor uplift any local authority can receive is 8%. We again are on that 8% floor, so we've received a minimum uplift in funding for high needs block, which obviously, although welcomed in terms of the increase, doesn't really address the pressures that we're seeing. So we went to Schools Forum with a number of proposals earlier in the year. We've then gone out to consult with schools and also did several virtual briefing sessions for heads and governors to run through the proposals. And the consultation responses that we received, a relatively low number of responses, but obviously considering the other pressure schools are under at the moment, not unsurprising in terms of that number. We then went back to Schools Forum and discussed those proposals further with them, and they made some decisions for the areas for which they have decision-making powers, and then we will be going back to them again in January with some final proposals. Ultimately, the final decision around the funding formula will be for this committee to make, and we will come back again at the January meeting with those final proposals for you to make that decision once the final data has been received. John, if there's anything more you want to say on that? Okay.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions from the committee on this report, please? Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you, Chair. So it is noted in the report that the level of dedicated school grant still has some limitations on affordability. So I was wondering, because we were discussing in previous committees about the ranking of the county council in terms of like the overall national picture. So I was wondering, with those changes in funding formulas, how far are we lifted up from the bottom of the ranking in terms of like how councils are funding, looking at the more national picture? If you can comment on that, if there has been any improvement in that sense. Thank you.
Just bear with me a second. I'm just picking up. We did it in a presentation previously, so I was just trying to find if I could see. I can't find the slides, so we can share this with the committee. Basically, we do have a kind of a league table where we bring up the numbers. I found it now. So previously, we were last year we were 145th out of 151 local authorities on the baseline schools block funding. This year, we've moved up to 137th. So we are moving up slightly, and those. I think it's important to say that also those differentials with those local authorities above us are starting to narrow as well. So I think using the Peter example that John uses, I think previously the gap between the per pupil funding with Cambridgeshire and Peter was over £500. That's now down to under £300 in terms of funding. So those gaps are closing. That said, when you compare to some of the London boroughs, that the differentials are still significant in terms of thousands of pounds in terms of per pupil funding in terms of those differentials.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to very briefly, the illustrative uplift of 2.9% in the schools block. I wonder if we can just speak to that without kind of digging into loads and loads of detail. Members will be aware that headline inflation rates are running higher than that, and there are particular cost pressures. I'd be concerned about things like maintenance and any kind of non-capital construction works. Do you have any concerns about what that, obviously there's a complicated formula it needs to go through before it reaches the actual schools, but do you have any concerns about what the kind of the real purchasing power of this money is going to be in the next year?
I think this is probably our biggest concern, actually, in terms of growth. So you mentioned quite rightly increase in energy costs. We've seen additional costs due to COVID coming through that haven't been funded, or I've seen the DfE has just reopened a new fund to support with those costs. I think the bigger challenge, however, is that there is in our pay settlement for schools this financial year, there is no, or academic year, there is no pay inflation. So there is likely to be a significant uplift coming next year to represent the fact that cost of living is rising for our staff. And we're going to be eating, and bear in mind staffing is the majority of the costs in schools. I suspect that any pay award there will extremely hamper any growth. So we're not viewing this as growth, we're viewing this as a contribution towards keeping budgets at a cash level. So it's going to be a huge concern for all that we're not going to have sufficient funding to fund inflation.
And also, just to add to that, one of the other issues, obviously, schools are funded on a per pupil basis. So you are going to have some schools which are going to have a falling roll, and therefore will see kind of cash reductions compared to previous years. So those schools are going to be under particular pressure in terms of that, the reduction of funding and the impact that actually has. Within the funding formula, there is no protection for schools with a falling roll. That was removed from the national funding formula several years ago. So those schools are protected to a minimum per pupil uplift because it is per pupil. If you do have a falling roll, you will see a reduction in funding. So that, alongside the cost pressures for some individual schools, could be quite significant.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton, please.
Thank you. I'd like you to comment in a bit more detail on 3.6.1 to the affordability paragraph. It came up at the schools forum, and there were some concerns there. So if you could just go through that in a little more detail for us and unpack it.
Apologies. So that was paragraph 3.6.1.
0.6.12.
Oh, 12. Okay, apologies. Yeah, okay. So effectively, this is an issue that we have with the way in which the funding formula works. As has already been picked up, it is quite complex. So until we get the final data sets from the Department for Education for each individual school and the total available distribution quantum, we don't actually know how that's going to translate into individual school budgets. So what we've tried to do here is put in place a series of steps that we would take to ensure that the money is allocated most appropriately. So effectively, if we have what we refer to as headroom, so if we run everything through the formula and there is effectively spare money in the pot, what we'd be looking to do is to effectively apply a weighting to all of the funding formula factors to uplift them by a certain percentage to allocate that available headroom until all that money is allocated. Conversely, if there's not enough money in the overall distribution pot, we'd be looking to apply a funding cap, which is part of the mechanism the Department for Education put in the national funding formula. So effectively what that would do is would apply a limit the gains of those schools that are gaining through the funding formula. And again, we would flex that percentage to reflect the amount of money that we've got available. Worst case scenario, if we've applied a funding cap and it is still not affordable overall, we would have to consider reducing the minimum funding guarantee. So as I said, at the moment, schools are guaranteed a percentage uplift per pupil on an annual basis. We would set that at the highest allowable level, which would be at 2%. If we couldn't afford to do that, we would have to potentially look at scaling that back down again. So effectively, all of these measures we'd have to look at in stages, depending on what the overall affordability would be, but we wouldn't make a final decision on that. We would take our proposals, remodel that, share it with Schools Forum at the January meeting, and obviously share it with this committee for a final decision to be taken. I'm hopeful, based on what we've seen so far, that it will just be a case of scaling up the funding rather than having to apply the cap or reducing the MFG. But obviously that is dependent on the final settlement.
Any further comments or questions on this? Canon Reid, please.
Can I just thank the executive for the quality of the detail that's being provided, because it is getting much more complicated, for, I think, to understand how to model this out. But I did want to just make a point on that. And of course, it's important, I guess, for us all to remember, isn't it, for the majority of our schools, the actual school-based funding formula is mediated through the lens of the way that the academies seek to distribute their funding. So I do think as a committee, we have to find a way to understand the impact of funding through the lens of multi-academy trusts, which of course, in the case of our secondary schools, is pretty well all our schools.
Okay, thank you. So we move to the report recommendations. We've been asked to review and comment on this report, which we have done. The final item today on this afternoon's agenda is the committee agenda plan, training plan and appointments. There are no changes to the committee agenda plan. Are there any questions on that, or can we take it as noted? Take it as noted. The committee training plan is included for noting. May I remind members about the session on the 2nd of December between midday and 1 o'clock on the Ofsted inspection framework? And are there any questions on the training plan? No, there are no changes to the published committee appointments. So that concludes today's meeting. The committee will next